In the last section of the course, we analyzed alternative data sets. In this section, we are going to create dynamic worksheets by using PivotTables. In this first segment, we are going to analyze data dynamically by using PivotTables. In this exercise, we are going to use the creating_start workbook. I have already opened that workbook and saved it under the name of creating. To begin, we click any cell in the Excel table, and then on the Insert tab, in the Tables group, we click the Pivot Table button, not the arrow. When we do, the Create Pivot Table dialog box appears. Verify that the Daily Volumes table appears in the Select a Table or Range box, and also that the New Worksheet option is selected. Click OK to have Excel create your pivot table on a new worksheet. In the Pivot Table Field List task pane, drag the center field header to the row labels area. Excel adds the center field values to the Pivot Table row area. Back in the Pivot Table Field List task pane, drag the year field header to the column labels area. Excel adds the year field values to the Pivot Table column area. Now in the Pivot Table Field List task pane, drag the volume field header to the values area. Excel fills in the body of the pivot table with the volume field values. Now in the Pivot Table Field List task pane, in the column labels area, drag the year field header to the row labels area and drop it beneath the center field header. Excel changes the pivot table to reflect this new organization. In this segment of the course, we analyzed data dynamically by using pivot tables. In the next segment, we are going to filter, show, and hide pivot table data. In the previous segment of the course, we analyzed data dynamically by using pivot tables. In this segment, we are going to filter, show, and hide pivot table data. In this exercise, we are going to use the focusing_start workbook. I've already opened that workbook and saved it under the new name of focusing. On the Sheet 2 worksheet, if necessary, click any cell in the pivot table. Then, in the Pivot Table Field List task pane's Choose Fields to Add to Report area, point to the center field, click the black down arrow that appears, and then clear the Select All checkbox. Doing so causes Excel to remove the check marks from every item in the list. Now select the Northwest checkbox and click OK. Excel filters the pivot table, showing only results from the Northwest center. Now on the Quick Access toolbar, click the Undo button. This causes Excel to remove your last change, which was to create the Northwest filter. Now in the Pivot Table Field List task pane, drag the Weekday field header from the Choose Fields to Add to Report area to the Report filter area. Now in the Pivot Table Field List task pane, click the Close button, which causes Excel to hide the Pivot Table Field List task pane. In the body of the worksheet, click the Weekday filter arrow, and then, if necessary, select the Multiple Items checkbox. When you do, Excel adds checkboxes beside the items in the Weekday field filter list. Now, we clear the All button, which removes the check marks from beside all the items in the list. And now, we select the Tuesday and Thursday checkboxes and click OK. When we do, Excel filters the pivot table, summarizing only those values from Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, in cell A5, click the Hide Detail button. Excel collapses rows that contain data from the year 2009, leaving only the subtotal row that summarizes that year's data. Now in cell A5, click the Show Detail button, which causes Excel to redisplay the collapsed rows. Now on the ribbon, in the Options Contextual tab, in the Show group, click the Field List button. This redisplays the PivotTable Field List task pane. Now in the PivotTable Field List task pane, in the Choose Fields to Add to Report group, click the Month field header arrow, and now in the search box, type JU. Excel displays the months June and July in the filter list. Click OK to have Excel display only those values from the months June and July. Now, on the Options Contextual tab of the ribbon, in the Actions group, click the Clear button, and then click Clear Filters. Excel clears all filters from the pivot table. Now, on the Options Contextual tab of the ribbon, in the Sort and Filter group, click Insert Slicer. The Insert Slicers dialog box appears. In the Insert Slicers dialog box, select the Center checkbox, and then click OK. A slicer for the center field appears. Click the Atlantic button, which causes Excel to filter the pivot table so only results for the Atlantic center appear. Now, in the slicer, we click Midwest, and then, holding down the Control key, click Mountain West and Northwest. Excel filters the pivot table so it displays results for the Midwest, Mountain West, and Northwest centers. In the upper right corner of the slicer, click the Clear Filter button. This causes Excel to remove the filter from the center field. Now right-click the slicer, and from the shortcut menu that appears, click Remove Center. Doing so causes Excel to remove the slicer from the pivot table. In this segment, we filtered, showed, and hid pivot table data. In the next segment, we are going to edit a pivot table. In the previous segment of this course, we filtered, showed, and hid pivot table data. In this segment, we are going to edit pivot tables. In this exercise, we are going to use the editing_start workbook. I have already opened it and saved it under the new name of editing. To start, on the pivot table sheet of the worksheet, click any cell in the pivot table, and then on the Options Contextual tab, in the pivot table group, in the pivot table name field, type Volume Summary with no space in the name, and press Return. When you do, Excel renames the pivot table to Volume Summary. Now on the Design Contextual tab, in the Layout group, click Subtotals, and then click Do Not Show Subtotals. Excel removes the subtotal rows from the pivot table. Now on the Design Contextual tab, in the Layout group, click Grand Totals, and then click On for Columns Only. Excel removes the cells that calculate each row's grand total. Now on the Quick Access toolbar, click the Undo button. This reverses the last change. Now right-click any data cell in the pivot table, point to Summarize Values By, and then click Average. Excel changes the value field summary operation from Sum to Average. Again, on the Quick Access toolbar, click the Undo button to undo that last change. Now right-click any cell in the body of the pivot table, and then click Value Field Settings. the Value Field Settings dialog box opens. Click the Show Values As tab. This displays the Show Values As page. And then, in the Show Values As list, click Percentage of Row Total. Click OK to have Excel change how it calculates the values in the pivot table. In this case, showing how much each individual value contributes to the whole of the values in the row. On the Quick Access toolbar, click the Undo button to undo the last change. And now on the Design tab, in the Layout group, click Subtotals, and then click Show All Subtotals at bottom of group. Excel displays the subtotals in the workbook, but this time displays them at the bottom of each grouping. Now click the Package Summary Sheet tab. In cell C4, type an equal sign, but do not press Enter. Now click the Pivot Table Sheet tab, and scroll down to cell K32. I will use the scroll wheel on my mouse. Click cell K32, and then press Enter. Excel creates a formula that gets data from that pivot table cell, which finds the total for all sales during the year 2010. In this segment, we edited pivot tables. In the next segment, we are going to format pivot tables. In the previous segment, we edited pivot tables. In this segment, we are going to format pivot tables. We are going to use the formatting_start workbook. I have already opened that workbook and saved it under the new name of formatting. To begin, on the Sheet 2 worksheet, right-click any cell in the data area of the pivot table, and then on the shortcut menu that appears, click Number Format. In the category list, click Number. This displays the number page of the Format Cells dialog box. In the Decimal Places field, type 0, and select the Use 1000s Separator checkbox, and click OK. When we do, Excel reformats our pivot table data. Now, if necessary, click the Design Contextual tab on the ribbon, and then in the Pivot Table Style Options group, check the Banded Rows checkbox. Now, on the Design Contextual tab, in the Pivot Table Styles group, click the More button, which is at the bottom right corner of the Styles gallery. And then in the gallery that appears, in the top row, click the third style from the left. Excel applies the pivot table style. Now again, in the lower right corner of the Pivot Table Styles gallery, click the More button, and then click the New Pivot Table Style button. Excel displays the new Pivot Table Quick Style dialog box. In the Name field, where the value is already highlighted, click Custom Style 1. Then in the Table Element list, click Header Row, and then click Format. This causes Excel to display the Format Cells dialog box. On the Font page, click the Color list, and then click the white square. On the Border page, in the Presets area, click Outline. Then on the Fill page, in the Background Color area, click the purple square at the lower right corner of the color palette. When you're done, click OK. The Format Cells dialog box closes, and the style that you created appears in the preview pane of the new Pivot Table Quick Style dialog box. In the Table Element list, click Second Row Stripe, and then click Format. The Format Cells dialog box opens to the last page that you had opened. On the Fill page, in the middle part of the background color area, click the 8th square on the second row. It is a light, dusty purple. Click OK once to close the Format Cells dialog box, and again to close the new PivotTable Quick Style dialog box. Now, in the PivotTable Styles gallery, the first style is the new style that we just created, called Custom Style 1. Click it to apply the formatting to your pivot table. Now, on the Design Contextual tab, in the PivotTable Style Options group, clear the Banded Rows checkbox. Excel removes the banding from your pivot table and from the preview of the custom style. Now we select cells K6 through K17, and then holding down the Control key, we select cells K19 through K30. On the Home tab, in the Styles group, click the Conditional Formatting button, point to Color Scales, and in the top row, click the second 3-color format from the left. Excel applies the conditional format to the selected cells. In this segment, we formatted pivot tables. In the next segment, which is the last segment of Section 9, we will create pivot tables from external data. In the previous segment of the course, we formatted pivot tables. In this segment, we are going to create pivot tables from external data. In this exercise, we are going to use the creating_start text file, which you will find in your practice files folder. First, we create a new Excel workbook, and then on the Data tab, in the Get External Data group, click From Text. This displays the Import Text File dialog box. Navigate to the folder that contains the creating_start text file, and then click the Import button. The text import wizard appears. Verify that the Delimited option button is selected, and then click Next. On the next page of the wizard, in the Delimiters area, verify that the Tab checkbox is selected, and also verify that the data displayed in the Data Preview area reflects the structure that you want. In this case, everything looks right. We have center, date, node data is moving over 2 columns, and all of the data appears to be relevant to the column that it's part of. Now we can click Finish, which displays the Import Data dialog box. Verify that the existing worksheet option is selected, and then click OK. Excel imports the data from a text file into your worksheet. Now on the Home tab, in the Styles group, click Format as Table, and click the first table style. The Format as Table dialog box appears. Verify that the My Table Has Headers checkbox is selected, and that the range A1 through H6571 appears in the Where's the Data for Your Table field. It does, so we can click OK, which displays a confirmation dialog box indicating that the selection overlaps one or more external data ranges. In this case, we do want to convert the selection to a table and remove all external connections, so we can click Yes, which creates an Excel table out of the data that we imported. Now on the Insert tab, in the Tables group, click the PivotTable button. Verify that the Select a Table or Range option is selected, that Table 1 appears in the Table/Range field, and also that the New Worksheet option is selected. Everything looks good, so we can click OK. When we do, Excel creates our new pivot table. In the Pivot Table Field List task pane, drag the Volume field header to the Values area, Now drag the weekday field header to the column labels area, and then drag the center field header to the row labels area. Now on the Quick Access toolbar, click the Save button. Browse to the folder where you want to save your data, and then in the file name field, type imported data, and click Save. In this segment of the course, we created pivot tables from external data. This is the last segment of Section 9, creating dynamic worksheets by using pivot tables. In the next section of the course, we are going to create charts and graphics.